Well, let me speak plainly as I can, and I hope you can hear what is going to be said. Mormonism teaches that if a law is going to be considered true, reliable, and of God, remember, a law that is true, reliable, and of God, it cannot be temporary in nature. It has always existed and will always exist. Doctrine and Covenants, I believe 42, verifies this. Eternal laws are so important in Mormonism that even one of their article of faiths reads, listen to this article of faith, we believe that all mankind may be saved, listen to this, saved by obedience to the laws and ordinances of the gospel. That's how they say a person is saved. We just finished an examination of Doctrine and Covenants, section 132, where Joseph Smith has God tell the world that this revelation is eternal and binding, and that this revelation must be kept in order for men to become gods. The doctrine of polygamy was considered a true law, an eternal principle, and by virtue of this, must be practiced according to Joseph Smith. Joseph wasn't alone in this teaching. LDS prophets who came after him were dogmatic in the belief that polygamy had to be practiced. Brigham Young, emphatic that it was an eternal law and even said that it must be entered into, quote, to become gods. John Taylor, third president of the LDS Church, emphatic. The law of polygamy must be kept, he insisted, saying that the men and women who opposed it, quote, are on the high road to apostasy. Journal of Discourse 11/2/21. Speaking of polygamy, Taylor also said the United States cannot abolish it. It was handed down from God. No nation on earth can prevent it, nor all the nations of the earth combined. I defy the United States. I will obey God. Wilford Woodruff, even the fourth president of the Mormon Church, said, quote, do away with polygamy, then we must do away with prophets and apostles, with revelation and the gifts and graces of the gospel, and finally give up our religion altogether and turn sectarians and do what the world does, then all would be all right. Well, we just can't do that. For God has commanded us to build up his kingdom and bear our testimony to the nations of the earth, and we are going to do it life or death. He has told us thus, and we shall obey him in days to come, as in days past. Journal of Discourse 13/166. In 1870, the Utah Saints living here sent a memorial to Congress describing plural marriage as, quote, a principle revealed by God underlying our every hope of eternal salvation and happiness in heaven. This is what the saints believed of the eternal law of polygamy, a principle revealed by God that underlies our every hope of eternal salvation and happiness in heaven. 10 years later, Wilford Woodruff received a revelation that polygamy was, quote, absolutely essential to Godhood. This was the eternal law as evidenced by LDS doctrine. Well, today we have an altogether different take on this supposed eternal law. The spin can be downright comical to downright evil. Not knowing the command to practice it remains in the command to practice it is even in their own books of doctrine. Many LDS today act as if polygamy was something weirdo Mormons used to do, and that it was never really a big part of the true church, with a few minor exceptions like Brigham Young. What they don't realize is the weirdo Mormons, or the FLDS, maintain a better picture of doctrinal Mormonism than the religion the Salt Lake LDS claim to embrace. Other Latter-day Saints speak today of the practice as though it was a temporary thing, like it was necessary for this specific time, or that very, very, very few select men were forced kind of to practice it. And as a means to diffuse the practice in this modern world and condemn those people who continue to practice it, 12th president of the LDS Church, Spencer W. Kimball, diminished this eternal law by calling it a church program. He called polygamy a church program. The spin is insidious. Listen, he said, quote, remember, the Lord put an end to this program many decades ago through a prophet who proclaimed that revelation to the world, end quote. So, as that movie says, what we've got here is a failure to communicate or some major obfuscations. There is so much spin and inconsistencies relative to this eternal law. Joseph Smith was emphatic. If the law comes from God, it is eternal, immutable, does not change, and we practice it come hell or high water. We have quotes from presidents 2, 3, 4, and even later, even Joseph F. Smith, that say polygamy is an eternal law. You must obey it to become God's. And suddenly, things change. We have God tell Joseph that it must be practiced. When did it end? How could it end? Has it even ended? In spite of the LDS claiming allegiance to underlying dedication to God's eternal law of polygamy, the United States government, beginning around 1866, began a number of attempts to end what they call the twin relic of barbarism, the first being slavery, the second being polygamy. The Wade Bill was introduced and defeated. Then came the Cragen Bill, the Ashley Bill, the Cullum Bill, the Voorhees Bill, and the Logan Bill, none of which passed the House or the Senate to become law, but all of which raised the national consciousness about what was going on out in Utah, or what I call the lots of women for one orny man law. In 1880, U.S. President Rutherford B. Hayes articulated the nation's attitude toward Utah quite well when he said, quote, "Utah is virtually under theocratic government of the Mormon Church. The union of church and state is complete. The result is the usual one. Usurpation and absorption of all temporal authority and power by the church." He continued, listen, quote, "Laws must be enacted which will take from the Mormon Church its temporal power. As a system of government, it is our duty to deal with it as an enemy of our institutions and its supporters and leaders as criminals." End. That's the President of the United States, Rutherford B. Hayes, when he looked at what Utah was doing with polygamy, this other relic of barbarism. This began what is called the Decade of Raids, 10-year period where United States officers hunted down practicers of LDS polygamists. In 1885, LDS President John Taylor and his two counselors had to go into hiding, and two of them went hiding in Utah. Joseph F. Smith went and hid in Hawaii because of their polygamous activities. 2 years later, politicians came up with the power-packed Edmunds-Tucker Act. Remember that, which it allowed wives for the first time in polygamous suits to actually testify against their husbands, which was not permitted before. It also made adultery a felony, and it hit the Mormon Church where the Mormon Church cannot stand to be hit, in the pocketbook. The church was disincorporated by the federal government by the Edmunds-Tucker Act, and seizure of church estates valued at over $50,000 began. Add to the fact that the third president, John Taylor, died while in hiding, and suddenly, lo and behold, the Mormons started to publicly deny the practice of polygamy. With Joseph Smith polygamy, it was a secret practice. With Brigham Young in the Utah Territory, it was open, it was mandatory, and they were so proud of it. But when the government turned up the heat, plural marriage went underground again, and spin became the operative word for the Latter-day Saints. Now, I need to say something before we go to the phones that's very important here. By pointing it out, I'm going to ruffle more feathers and probably be considered an even more hateful anti-Mormon than I already am. But when you're dealing with true believing LDS and or defenders of the LDS faith, truth is secondary. Truth is even tertiary of an objective. And while this is very present at times in their business practices, which is why Utah over the years has always been at the top of the heap as far as the states go in terms of scams, financial scams, the fact is never more true than when you're in a discussion with people about God, the Bible, religion, and Mormon history. This is due to a few factors. First and foremost, Mormonism started its life through a deceptive seed. Joseph Smith, the founder, used deceptive practices and methods throughout his life. Whether in his treasure-seeking escapades, the story of the Book of Mormon origins, the famed Book of Abraham translations, the Kinderhook plates, and even dealing with his own wife Emma regarding his secret multiple wives. He was a deceiver. History shows that. I could not be taken to court for the statement if he was alive and well today. He was a deceiver, and from this seed, Mormonism sprung. Secondly, the LDS believed that they must protect the church at all costs. And since the church is an institution full of men, it will have faults, and faults need to be whitewashed if other people are going to embrace this institution. So Mormons will whitewash or cover the truth at all costs to keep people from knowing what its history and doctrines have been. Someone who has a relationship with Jesus Christ, who is the truth, never has a need to lie. Because as the truth, he has no darkness or shadow in him. You never have to lie about the gospel of Jesus Christ. But Mormonism has to hide and cover and duck and spin because it is not Jesus Christ they're defending. It is a man-made institution. In an effort to protect their practices from those who would not understand, Mormonism, under the fire of the federal government, began to do what they do best, and that's spin and hair split and deceive. One way they did this was by bifurcating the construction of the church, and let me explain that. At that time, when the federal government was investigating whether they practiced polygamy, they found it not problematic or deceptive at all for the leaders of the church to say, as the leaders of the church, we denounce polygamy and do not practice it. What they don't tell you is they did not include the priesthood as part of the leadership. They viewed the priesthood as a separate part of the church. So they could in all good conscience say, the leaders of the Mormon church do not believe in polygamy. But the priesthood members do. And therefore, they continued to practice it. It's a game of semantics. This is how the church leaders work. Let me tell you a true story. One Brother Brown was asked about his views on plural marriage when he was under oath during a polygamous trial and they were choosing the jury. Well, this Brother Brown was known by the U.S. prosecutors as being a guy who was ardent LDS and a polygamist. And they asked him, what do you think of polygamy? And Brother Brown said he did not believe polygamy to be right. Okay, remember that. Brother Brown said under oath, I don't believe polygamy to be right. The federal officer knew the guy was a polygamist and said, we're going to take him to trial for perjury and see what the heck he's doing. So they put him on trial, and in the perjury of Brother Brown, the faithful Mormon explained that his testimony was not false, because his adherence to polygamy was not a matter of his belief. His participation in polygamy was a matter of that he knew it was right. It wasn't a matter he believed it. He knew it was right. So in a court of law, he was capable of saying, I don't believe polygamy is true. I believe it. I know it's right. Do you get that? It's words, and these semantical games. You meet an LDS missionary, you meet a self-appointed LDS apologist, you even talk to the apostles and listen to their public speech when they get interviewed on television with Mike Wallace or any of these guys. They spin, they hair split, and they deny the truth still today because polygamy is still today part of the doctrine. They are just waiting for the time to practice it.